And let's get started with a video about our guest speaker. Let's roll the tape.
The FBI says a man who says he overheard at the group is launching $1 million program. Major crime is on the rise.
Nadia Bilchik is a television news anchor, keynote speaker, author, trainer, and communications consultant. She has a wealth of experience interviewing and consulting with world-renowned figures, celebrities, and corporations. Nadia speaks on how to get people to like you, trust you, and want to do business with you, with topics like leveraging the power of your personal presence, networking for success, and lighting the fire. Nadia Bilchik.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nadia Bilchik.
We are the champions. No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world.
Thank you. And how cool to be introduced by Carol Tomei, right? I mean, how cool! She exemplifies everything we're going to speak about today. So thank you, Carol. And we're going to talk about her amazing body language. Did you see how open those hands were? I'm going to tell you why that's so powerful in a moment. But first, people ask me a lot of questions about my life. What is it like to stand up in front of an audience or be a broadcaster? What's it like to interview Richard Gere? And is George Clooney really so sexy? Meeting Nelson Mandela. But the question they ask me most, and this is around the world, before you stand up in front of a group of people, do you get? Yes. So because I am so fond of Home Depot, and I know you all so well, I'm going to share my secret, my antidote to nervousness. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand up. Now, you're nice and warmed up for this now. So I'm going to show you what I do. Please don't get a fright. So just watch, you don't have to do anything yet. I go to the back of the CNN newsroom. And right now I went to the back over here. When no one's looking at me, I go like this. 1, 2, 3, huh. Okay, now you're gonna do it. Nobody is watching you, I promise you. They're too busy looking at me, making a complete fool of myself. This is fabulous. You'll feel all the release of tension, so bear with me. No one's looking at you. And take a deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, huh, and 1, 2, 3, huh, and 1, 2, 3, huh. And don't you feel better already? That's great. It also works, by the way, if you're dealing with a particularly difficult customer. Instead of screaming at them, just go to the back. Huh. Yes, how can I help you? How many times have you felt like that? So now I'm going to ask you to think of the year 1997. How many people were not living in the city they're living in now in 1997? Wow. How many people were not working for the Home Depot in 97? How many people were? Can you please stand up? 97, you were, wow. I want a warm round of applause for all the people who've been here since 1997. Thank you. And I know some of you have been here from well before 97. Thank you all. I know Crystal has been here since 1985, and Anne-Marie from 1985, and Carol since 95. So people have been here for many, many years. But I want you to think of the year 97, what was going on in your life. We probably have some people in this room who were in elementary school. But in 97, I was living in Johannesburg, South Africa. And it was a rather extraordinary time to be living there because Nelson Mandela had become president. No longer the pariahs of the world. We were now the so-called Rainbow Nation. And things were pretty amazing. I was actually a primetime anchor at the time. I also had the first media and presentation skills school in the country. So life was pretty cool with the exception of one thing, and that was the crime. And as a journalist, I had done a story in the crime wall on the center of Johannesburg, people who'd been robbed and raped and murdered and hijacked. And things were getting really tough. And in fact, one cold Thursday night in 97, we got a call that a very close friend of ours had had 5 armed guys burst into his house, torture him with a burning iron. And they said, look, Rob is in critical condition and not expected to live. He didn't. That same night, my mother called to say a lawyer we knew very well, he'd been very active in the anti-apartheid movement, had been hijacked and murdered. So that night, my husband looks at me and says, look, we've got an opportunity to move to Atlanta. He'd been made a job offer, and we had won our green cards in the lottery. Anybody aware that you can win a green card in the lottery? Anyone's family won a green card lottery? So I decided that being a parent of 2 small children, here's an opportunity to raise them in a safer place. So on that cold Thursday night, I agreed to do it. By Friday morning, I changed my mind. It was too late. My husband was that adamant that we move. Well, in 6 weeks, I gave up notice at Mnet Television. They told me if I came back within the year, I could still have my job. And I found myself living in Atlanta, Georgia. I'd actually never been to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, how many people are not living in the city they were born in? The majority. So everybody knows what it is to move. How many people were not born in this country? So we've got people from all over the world. So you know what it is to change countries and continents and side of the road. But what do you give up most, you think, when you leave a country or a city or an entire experience? You give up your whole identity, your friends. So I had to start again. So really what I want to share with you in the short time are some of the qualities and some of the practices that I had to use and implement to be standing in front of you today. And a lot of trial, I will tell you, a lot of error. I have learned so much from speaking to audiences. And you know, I've been teaching and training programs at the Home Depot for about the last 7 years. So I've gleaned so much wisdom. I always say, I wish I knew then what I know now. But I'm so proud to be in this moment. You know, I even have my own Home Depot apron. How cool is that? So I look back and say, what got me to this place? What got me to be standing in front of you? And let's look at those things. What gets Carol Tomei to be a rock star? Isn't she a rock star at this company? Yeah. And she really is. And it's what I love about Carol is it's so profound. It's through every aspect of her persona that she gets this respect. So what do we learn from that? So I'm going to ask us to take a minute and think about what having presence really means to us. And why is everyone in this room? Well, you're all here because every single person in this room is a leader. You have been identified by this company as someone with remarkable potential. You already do lead. So think about this. What would it be if we could be more persuasive and more influential? Because each one of us in this room really has the power to impact our own careers, and as Carol so well pointed out, that of others. And do we do everything we can to impact not only the trajectory of our own careers, but those of others? Or could we, as Emerald says, you know, just before he adds flavor to food and before he says bam, he says, let's kick it up, huh? Well, that's why we're here, because what happens is there's very little that I share with you today that you haven't heard at some point in your life. So I always say I don't offer you revelation, but I will offer you a series of BLOs. Any guesses of a BLO? A blinding light of the obvious, right? Guys, you're all so smart. You got here through a journey, but what happens is we get so busy. You're often so busy dealing with the day-to-day realities of your lives and the store and if your DMs or what goes into your lives that we forget to be strategic. So isn't it wonderful that we get an hour together today, half an hour with me and another half an hour with the panelists, to really look at ourselves and do an audit and say, are we maximizing ourselves or could we be more conscious? Because when you think about your career, it really is a whole series of examples of things you've done to get where you are. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is turn to the person next to you, and I'm going to ask you to come up with one example in the last while where you actually impacted the outcome of a situation, where you were influential, where you did recommend something and somebody took action on it. So I'll just quickly tell you, everybody knows about the Oscar Pistorius trial going on in South Africa, right? So at my meeting at CNN on Friday, I said, guys, we know the details of the case. Why don't we talk about the difference between the South African jury system and the American jury system? For example, we know that South Africans don't have a jury, they have a judge. And I said, let's talk about why South Africa abolished the jury. You'll have to go into my segment to see why. But anyway, the way I presented it, guess what happened on Sunday morning on CNN? That's what I spoke about. So I'm going to ask you to think about a time where you impacted the outcome of a situation, or you recommended somebody for promotion. Just an idea, an example that comes to mind where you were persuasive and influential and the outcome was directly a result of your idea or your influence. Okay? Turn to the person next to you for a minute. So ladies, you're not going to have very long for this. Will you share yours? Okay, I know this is a discussion that could go on. Did everybody have a chance to share? You only did one. Okay, wherever you're at, one thing we know, the noise level of a room is directly proportional with how much fun we're having. But for the purposes of keeping our session as brief as we need it to be, I'm going to ask for an example right here. So if you don't mind standing, telling us who you are and giving us, Tara, an example of where you were persuasive and influential.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Terry Tucker, and I'm from the South Atlantic region. So one of my examples that I actually gave two. One of my examples was we was working on celebration of service as a corporation as a whole. We were targeting making sure that we can help veterans. So what I chose to do is found a female veteran homeless shelter that we could impact. We went from having 4 females that had a place to live to over 24 females that had a place to live when we were done.
Wow. Okay, another example of persuasion and influence. Another example. We have one over here. By the end of the session, everyone's going to be jumping up. They're going to want to do this. Just an example. Share an example. Did anybody hear an example of where you somehow, your idea, what you said or did, changed the action of something that transpired? Who's got another example? Okay, Michelle's got one over here. Thank you, Michelle.
Good afternoon, everybody. Michelle Valencia, District Manager in the Pacific Northwest. The example that I shared actually came out of District 289, my district, and back in the month of October, our Bend, Oregon store had been conducting what we call Pink Shirt Friday, and it was really in support of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so it really caught a lot of momentum within that store. And actually, an associate from that store came back to the store support center. They were going through their assistant manager fundamentals training and shared that same concept. So October turned into Pinktober through the Pacific Northwest. Everyone throughout the region adopted the concept, and every Friday through the rest of the month, we wore pink shirts to support our associates and many of those that have been affected with breast cancer. And the impact was a lot more than we actually ever anticipated. So it was a very, very positive.
Excellent, excellent examples. Anybody feels they must share their example with us? So I want you to think about that for a moment. Everybody had an example, right? Do we agree? Did everybody have one example that came to mind? So what was that? Everybody showed what we call, you asserted your leadership presence. One thing is for sure is that you do not get into this room at this level of this organization if you don't already have the qualities, the capabilities. So let's take a moment and think about what is this concept of leadership presence? What is it? So the definition that I've come up with is that leadership presence in essence is exemplified by so many leaders at this company, and it comes down to your ability to persuade and influence. And if I were to dissect the components of your ability to persuade and influence, it would really fall into 3 categories. And they would be your actual performance, your image, how you are perceived by others, and exposure. Who knows about you? Who has access to you? And I'm going to ask you to take a minute and think about right now, in your specific role, what's more important in your life, performance, image, or exposure? performance. What do you think is absolutely instrumental in the acceleration of your career? Performance, image, exposure. So let's say all three. Do you all know people that you've worked with who sabotage themselves because of one of the three? So for the purposes of today, when we talk about asserting your leadership presence, we're going to talk about image and exposure, and that everything you do communicates. And we're going to start off saying what enhances the way you come across, and we specifically in the area of presence. When somebody walks into a room, what about that individual makes you want to pay attention to them? What about that individual makes you sense that they have leadership potential? We've all had people that you've seen along the way who are very good at what they do, right? But you just go, they're just not management material. Got that? So I'm going to ask you to think for a moment and again turn to the person next to you and come up with 2 qualities each. In terms of one's physical persona, when somebody presents an idea or speaks up in a meeting, what enhances, what makes you want to listen to that person, and what makes you zone out? 2 things. 2 things that enhance and 2 things that detract or distract. If you can, turn to the person next to you.
If you could get to a brighter part of the room.
Okay. Okay, so we're just looking for 2 things. So let's hear from Lauren. What is one thing that, as far as you're concerned, enhances someone's presence as far as their image is concerned?
Energy is...
Energy. Okay, so I ask you, is energy what someone says or how they say it or both? Okay, let's have a negative over here. What detracts?
About not speaking with confidence.
Not speaking with confidence. Is that what someone says, how they say it, or both? Okay, let's have one more original one from this lovely lady whose name is Julie. Something that enhances.
Presence.
Presence. Is presence a verbal, a nonverbal, or both? Both. Okay, and let's have someone from the Midwest, something that attracts.
Energy, passion.
Passion. Is passion verbal, nonverbal, or both? Did Carol just show us a lot of passion? Was it what she said or how she said it, or both? Both. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, while we think about this for a moment, what is more important in your overall presence? The verbal, the nonverbal, or both? Isn't it cute the way we have this arrangement going on? It's because whatever we're doing today is going to be televised. No pressure. Okay, so is more of the way you come across to customers, to associates, to higher-ups, to colleagues, is it verbal, nonverbal, or both? Okay. So I'm just asking you to become aware. Now, there was a professor at UCLA University, and he said, actually 7% the way of a message is composed is what you say, is the words you use. So when you're trying to motivate associates to sell more, are you saying, you know, if the store just a bit better, we'd all have more profit share? And he said 93% was the nonverbal. And he went on to say that 55% was body language and dress and facial expression. You know those people you work with who just always look unhappy? You know? They just look like life sucks, work sucks. And it's not that their performance is bad. They manage to stack. They know what they're doing. They're very methodical. But they always look like they're in terrible pain. Is that verbal, nonverbal, or both? So I'm asking you to think about yourself. How you criticize somebody, or, you know, I love the term at Home Depot, we don't call it as criticism, we call it an area of... Exactly. What you say, how you say it, both. So when we think of your overall presence, as I'm saying this, think about yourself, but remember you're in this room in two capacities. You're here for yourself, but you influence others. Who do you work with that is sabotaging themselves, not because of their performance, but because of their demeanor or the way they come across or the way they speak to others? And how do you as a leader coach them through that? And by the way, one of the ways I found useful is to say to somebody, let's say Melody comes to me and says, why am I not getting promoted? I just don't understand. I'm just never getting promoted. I work so hard. I'm here for so many hours. And I say to her, Melody, I know how brilliant you are. I can see how smart you are, and I can see how hard you work. But what concerns me is that management doesn't always see it. So maybe if you ironed your shirt, or washed your hair occasionally, just those little things, maybe, but the way to say it is kindly, I can see, because all of you in this room impact others. Maya Angelou said it so beautifully. She said, if you get, give, and if you learn, teach. So what about this session today that you don't need, but you influence someone else who does, and you can see that they're sabotaging themselves because they're not aware of this? Nobody comes to work and says, today, let me do badly, let me suck, let me annoy everybody. No! Everyone wants to do their best, but we all know people who do that because they don't have awareness around very simple things. This is not brain science. And I've just seen that my clock is not turned towards me. Oh, there it is. Very good. Okay. So, and by the way, to my clock people, does that mean I've spoken for 8:40 or I've got 8:40 left? Oh, thank you. So Maya Angelou said it so beautifully. People don't always remember what you say. They remember the way you make them feel, right? So take a minute and think about communication is like a rocket launch. There's two aspects to a rocket launch. There is what you say and how you say it. And the same is true of a rocket. You've got your actual rocket and you've got your delivery. You can have perfect content. Carol Tomei could have got up here earlier and said exactly what she said. But if she hadn't done it with energy and passion and animation, it wouldn't have been so effective. So I'm asking you to think about what you say and how you say it. The rocket and the delivery system. Now, how many people here get really nervous before a presentation or before they do a store walk with somebody intimidating? Okay? Think about your body language. Does my body language look like I'm open and comfortable? And one of the things as women we tend to do is to protect ourselves. And it's very simple, because if you were throwing something at me, I would do this. Whereas if I'm warm and open and confident, and you know why it was so powerful that Carol showed us her palms? Because she said, look, no weapons. So I'm saying, do we stand open and say, here? Because, women tend to do this. So if you find yourself clinging on, air your armpits. Glorious, I know. Don't forget, good, calm eye contact is an important part of body language, because it just shows confidence and it shows respect. And Amy Cuddy, who is a social scientist who speaks about body language, says simply, it's not about faking it till you make it. Fake it till you believe it. If you're feeling very nervous and somebody intimidating is coming into your store, go to the back. Do not do this in front of them. Put your hands above your head and stand like this. It's a power pose, and apparently it increases testosterone, which makes you feel powerful, and it decreases cortisol. Try that. Probably not a good idea to do it when they walk in. Okay, so think of eye contact. Now, nervousness is both physical and mental. So on that subject, can I have 2 volunteers, please? Thank you. 2 volunteers on stage. Thank you to our 2 volunteers. Appreciate it. Okay, other than the lovely lady in front, who is relieved that they're not standing on the stage with these 2? Well, thank you, ladies. I am so grateful, Catherine and Renee. You each get a gift. Inside the gift is a beautiful key ring, because courage and standing up in front of a group of people is actually a key to success. Thank you very much. That's it, ladies. You may step down. And you're probably saying, what was that all about? Well, very simply, I want you to be very honest with yourself. What went through your mind when I said, can I have 2 volunteers? What is she going to ask me to do? Now, if you think about it, it was just a gut primitive reaction. it's not a logical reaction. A logical reaction, this is a professional woman, this is a professional environment. What could she possibly ask me to do that's so terrible, right? But isn't it interesting that we allow that moment to sabotage us? Now I will tell you, I have done this exercise in front of a room of 1,000 people, and I've said, can I have 2 volunteers? Nobody stands up. And I wait and I walk, and people think it's very awkward. Then they start feeling sorry for me. And then somebody will go, oh, this poor woman, let me put her out of her misery. And then they'll stand up, but I've stood there. Because the reality is, when we face an intimidating situation, a job interview, a particularly intimidating person, anything, standing up in front of a group of people, what happens is our emotion takes over and we literally go into a primitive state. You are threatening me, I am scared of you, so I'm either going to stay and fight you or I'm going to run away. But what I really want to do is run away. So what do women do in presentations? They look like this, like they want to sink through the floor entirely. Or they speak very, very quickly so they can get back to where they're sitting. So in the 2-day executive presence class that I actually do at the Home Depot, we spend a lot of time working, particularly with women, saying, how do you come across as someone who is calm and confident and in charge? Because we buy into people's confidence. There's a book by Cialdini on influence, and he says we are persuaded and influenced by people who make us feel protected. So you talk about Carol in a male-dominated world, and she's talking about financial things. What about her persona made people say, yes, we trust her, we believe her with our millions? So think about yourself in that term. What about the way I come across makes people trust me? And he even says it's more primitive than that. We feel protected by people who make us feel that if there was a storm, they would take care of us. So I'm asking you, do you capitalize on that in your stance and your behavior and the way you come across? So think about that in terms of nervousness, and think about nerves as, is this really a rational nervousness? Is it my body or my mind? And how real is this? Because fear very often is simply false evidence appearing real. And take a moment and say, what are the situations that make me most nervous? And am I being realistic about them? You know, I have to tell you, I once interviewed Anthony Hopkins. And just before the interview, a French journalist walked out and she said to me, oh, my interview with Mr. Hopkins was so bad. Mr. Hopkins was in a terrible mood. My interview was so shit. That's what she said, not me. And I thought, I really can't afford to have a shit interview because South African television is paying me a lot of money. And I did something that I'm going to ask you to learn to do, was I started to think right now in this moment, Mr. Hopkins is just another person. And in this moment, it's just me and him. And I started to practice something which is the development of what I call my positive emotional memory database. And I thought, what can I think about? What thoughts and pictures can I access so that in that moment, I'm not only this person, I'm a culmination of my success. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment and think about what, if you are feeling particularly nervous, if you're feeling particularly intimidated, what can you think about that reminds you of your success, your capability? And I call this your positive emotional memory database. So when I'm feeling particularly anxious or nervous, I access it, and automatically I start feeling so much more comfortable. I was once doing an overnight shift at CNN. Has anybody ever done overnight shifts? And now, how many people are doing overnight shifts here? So my favorite American expression, it sucks. So I'm doing an overnight shift, and the makeup artist says it's absolutely fine. You can have a little nap in the makeup room. So I did for a few minutes. And the next day, the then head of the CNN airport network where I was anchoring calls me and says to me, you are not allowed to sleep on your shift, and do you know how terrible this is? And I was absolutely distraught. I was so upset. And I saw that I had an audition for a show called Homes for Better Living at 4:30, and the time was 4 o'clock. So I got into my car and I thought, how am I going to feel okay about this? And I accessed my positive emotional memory disk. My children were little at the time, so I thought about them. As they became teenagers, I tried not to. But I thought about what are the things that really reinforce who I am. And by the time I got to the audition, I was feeling so much better. And they said to me, you have memorized the script, haven't you? And of course I hadn't. But I did this improvisation. Anyway, I got the job, and a couple of years ago, the pilot aired. But I'm telling you that because in that moment, I could have told everyone how upset I was. Do you think I would have got the job? No. But I accessed past positive experience to help me exude the kind of confidence that you spoke about that's so necessary in terms of presence. So today, make a decision. Every time you have an experience that's positive or something reinforcing, say, I'm going to put that on my positive emotional memory disk, and next time I'm feeling anxious or intimidated, I'm going to insert that and remind myself who I am. And I will tell you, through all the years, that's been a very, very valuable tool. I also think about my apron, and that makes me very happy. Or I might think about this moment, because so often we just focus on the fear and the panic and don't remind ourselves that every single person in this room has a great story and is very successful and has so much to share. John Kehoe wrote a book called Mind Power, and he said people always think they're only as good as their past experience. And he said that's not true. You're a culmination of your success. And do we exude that with people who we perceive to have more power than us? It's all very well with people who we consider to be peers, but people who have more power than us. And I'm sure you've heard the term that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the taking of action despite the fear. The other part of having presence is to be prepared. You know, we say there are 3 key things about looking comfortable and confident, and that is preparation, preparation, and pills. No, preparation, preparation, and preparation. So, how many people in this group actually do give presentations to more than 2-3 people at a time? So, being prepared, one of the best things you can do is say, how am I going to start this presentation? And a wonderful technique is to learn to hook your audience. And the hook of an audience is that initial couple of seconds that your audience decides very quickly, are they interested in hearing what you have to say, or are they going to zone out? So let me give you an example. If you are speaking to associates about selling attachments, option 1, hello associates, we're here to talk about selling attachments and how at the end of the day it will result in profit share for you. Option 2, tell a story. It was Christmas 3 years ago, and my 5-year-old son got this wonderful toy car, and he was so excited, so he woke me up at 5 o'clock in the morning to open the toy car, and I said he could. It was snowing outside. We ripped open the paper. We're ready to go with the electronic car, and guess what? No. And I'm thinking, why didn't the sales associate at Toys R Us tell my parents, if they're buying a toy car, where are the... And that's exactly how our customers feel. If they get home and they've got their paint and their paintbrush, but they don't have that's how they feel. So think intelligently about how you can start a presentation or a communication to people. If you're talking to cashiers about being more empowered, instead of looking at them and saying, hello, it's important to be more empowered and you should do a better job, you know. It's so much more powerful if you give them a statistic or a statement. Something like, and correct me if I'm wrong, 75% of people who walk into our store ever interact with one person, and that is the cashier. Ladies and gentlemen, as cashiers, what we're going to talk about is how impactful and important your role is. So there's so many ways that you can hook your audience. One of my all-time favorite hooks is this. It's a store manager, and he's talking to cashiers about how important their role is. So I'm going to do the accelerated version. Now, remember, I'm a guy, and I'm leaving my store on a Thursday, and this is my story, so I'm telling it on his behalf. It's a Thursday afternoon, I'm leaving my store, and there's a line from where I'm standing to the end over there. And I'm going, what is going on here? And I find out that somebody wanted to return a tree, and the cashier won't return the tree. Anyway, I'm very frustrated. We get the tree returned, making sense, the $50 tree. Okay? And finally, we get the line rolling, and I leave, and I'm really frustrated because I know that that is not a good customer experience. Anyway, I get into my car, and my wife calls me. She says, do you mind going to get Chick-fil-A? Because I haven't had a chance to cook. I go, okay, I'll get Chick-fil-A. And I get to Chick-fil-A. How much do you think Chick-fil-A costs? It's a family, 4 kids and me. My wife doesn't eat Chick-fil-A. $50. Anyway, I get to the Chick-fil-A. You know, it's milkshakes, it's onion rings, it's everything. We want it all. I get to the cashier, and guess what? I've left my wallet at the store. Because I was so frustrated. So I say to the kid at the cashier, look, I'm so sorry. This is really embarrassing. I've left my... The cashier says to me, don't worry, sir. It's fine. No problem. You can take your $50 worth of food. I think to myself, wow, this is unbelievable. I say to him, but I don't even have $1. Don't you understand? He says, don't worry, sir. It's on us. I drive home and I think to myself, isn't that unbelievable? That some kid at Chick-fil-A is more empowered than the person who's been our cashier for 10 years. So it was a great story. So I'm asking you, as leaders in your stores, think about, do you approach presentations in a way that really gets through to people? And the best you can do is to make it real and tell stories and say, last night when I was in this store, this was my experience. Make it real, tell a story, a fact, a statement. So that's a very helpful way of coming across with more power, more presence, and being more engaging. So I wish we had a lot of time to do this, but we don't. But if you come and do the 2 days at the Home Depot, we go through it in detail. So think about always hooking your audience, giving your audience evidence, telling them stories, reeling them in, and focus on delivery. And delivery is energy. Now, when I speak about energy, that doesn't mean you have to walk around like you're on crack. But does your level of energy translate and say, I want to be here? Eye contact and body language. And all of those things go into being heard. And in that way, you will launch your message more impactfully into the hearts and minds of your audience of 1 or 100. Now, I cannot talk about leadership presence without talking about networking and building relationships, which I know is a core principle and value of this company. And do we do that as well as we need to be doing it, or are we so busy dealing with the day-to-day, or what Stephen Covey talks about, the whirlwind of our lives? So how did I get to be here today? Because I was talking at Georgia Tech, and a young lady came up to me and said, Nadia, I also came from another country. And we started talking, and then her sister wanted to come to CNN, and we became friends, and we chatted. And so we went from a connection to a collaboration. But first, we had to have a conversation. So please, during the course of this conference, when you're sitting next to somebody like you are now, say to them, what's your biggest challenge right now? What's the one thing in your life that's upsetting you or that's difficult for you? Now, that doesn't mean you go up to a complete stranger and go, hello, what's causing you the most pain? But Carol said it so well, and we're going to discuss it in the panel as well, how critical relationships are. And if you happen to meet somebody and you completely don't know what you're going to say to them, just remember, if you want to consolidate the relationship, we all have 3 phases of our lives in common. We all have a... I once interviewed a boxer. I knew nothing about boxing, but I knew he had a... What could you ask a boxer about his past? Right. What could I ask a person I'm meeting about their present? What's the one thing in your life that's challenged right now? What's the thing about your job you enjoy the most? What could I ask a boxer about his future? Any plans once you're brain dead? But if I meet somebody, what can I ask about your future? Do you intend to stay here? Hopes, goals, aspirations? But so often I meet people and they say, I run out of conversation. We all have and other thing about networking, on a very superficial level, if I happen to be standing with Amy and Julie walks in, don't carry on talking to Amy and have Julie stand there like that. Hi. And at this point, doesn't it happen to you that you've forgotten their names? And then you go, do you two know each other? And you hope that she goes, yes, I'm Amy, I'm Julie. I'm sorry, we don't have time to practice it, but this is how it usually works. Hello, I'm Amy, I'm Julie. Hello, Julie and I were just talking about, and you include the person in your conversation. The worst that happens if you go, do you two know each other? And they go, no. But I'm asking you, this is such a great opportunity to network and to consolidate and to continue to build relationships. So yes, I know we have covered a lot of material in a very short amount of time. And I do want to tell you all, it is much harder to give a 30-minute talk than it is to give a 30-hour talk, because you have to say, what do I keep in and what do I keep out? So think about this for a moment. We've spoken a lot about presence, and presence is everything. It's your performance, it's your image, and your exposure. Critical to that is having the courage. Thinking about what is my attitude towards this, and am I allowing fear to sabotage me when it's only false evidence appearing real? Am I consolidating all my relationships in the way that I should? And am I taking the time to talk to the person next to me right here at this conference and continue a relationship with them? Because we don't know what the impact of that long term will be. So because we don't have time for feedback as such, I am going to ask you, when you get a moment, one thing you learned from today, to tweet me and say, @NadiaBilczyk, #takeaway, and one thing that was a takeaway for you from today, and then I'll put it all together and we can all share it. I'm so excited that at my age, I can actually say @NadiaBilczyk, #takeaway. But please, that will be so helpful. And please continue to be as incredible and wonderful as you are. And on that note, I'm going to ask everybody to stand up. And remember two things. Okay, number one, Oscar Wilde said, you may as well like yourself because everyone else is already taken. And one more, Napoleon Hill said, the world has a way of making place for people who look like they know where they're going. And you all look like you know where you're going. So take a deep breath in. And 1, 2, 3, ha! Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you.